I'll begin with a reading from the book, and then Tobias and David will reflect on the work of how they have told the story in film and design, and then we'll open it up for your comments and questions in the chat. Let me begin with a reading from the chapter on the 1831 College in Yale and Slavery, a History. September 10th, 1831 was a day when Hope Unborn was killed in New Haven. Earlier that year, an impressive new state house opened on New Haven's Upper Green, just behind the Center Church and immediately across the Yale campus from the Yale campus. Located at the very center of the community, the Upper Green had served as New Haven's burial ground until 1797, when the Grove Street Cemetery opened. The last interment occurred there in 1821. The new 1831 State House had its east side, quote, built over the graves of a number of persons, as a later historian would note. The workmen in digging for a foundation for the new State House came across numerous bones, it was later reported. And quoting from the early history, instead of exposing them to view, they pounded them into the earth. Only months after the State House opened, New Haven's freemen, the white male property owners, many affiliated with Yale, gathered for an extraordinary town meeting that would obliterate, like those bones pounded down into the earth, bold hopes for the nation's first Black college. The college would have been America's inaugural Black college or university and would have been known today as an HBCU, an historically Black college or university. It was an idea brought to life by a coalition, both local and national, of free Black leaders and white allies. They considered New Haven a prime location, in part because it was vibrant and urbane, had ties to the Caribbean, and was noted as a center of higher education as home to Yale. In the 1830s, Yale was the nation's largest college. Not only a leading light for New Haven and Connecticut, the institution had broad influence nationally. Its report on the course of instruction in Yale College of 1828 would later be considered one of the most important documents in American higher education and established the parameters of liberal education for much of the 19th century. Yale's impact in this era would later earn the appellation Mother of Colleges in recognition of its alumni being the founding presidents of institutions, including Georgia, Hamilton, Kenyon, Illinois, Wabash, the University of Missouri, the University of Mississippi, and the University of Wisconsin. This generative role for other white colleges makes Yale involvement in aborting a Black college even more notable. This was the setting in New Haven at the time a bold proposal was made to create the nation's first college for Black men. The year 1831 was a crucial milestone in the origins of the abolition movement. The previous year, in September, Black leaders from throughout the antebellum North had gathered at Mother Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Philadelphia. Delegates included New Haven's own Scipio Augustus. That convention was the meeting that launched a movement, an evolving crusade for Black freedom, which emerged from African American communities as well as among white allies. Bishop Richard Allen gave the main address at his church at the 1830 convention, and its success led to the decision to hold annual meetings beginning the following year. These productive years of social and political organizing gave birth to the dream of a Black college in New Haven. White allies of the project included New Haven Simeon Jocelyn and his Boston friend William Garrison, who began publishing the abolitionist newspaper, The Liberator, in that year of the Great Eclipse in January 1831. That same year, New Haven Black leaders John Creed and J.L. Cross became agents for The Liberator. But the seeds of the abolition movement in New Haven had been planted years before, and they could be found in a newly formed Black church. Beginning in 1820, Black parishioners had gathered for services with Jocelyn, a white pastor and abolitionist, in his home. In 1824, early free Black leaders in New Haven, including Prince Cooper, Prince Duplex Jr., William Lanson, and Bias Stanley, joined with Jocelyn to establish the African Ecclesiastical Society, which would soon come to be known as the Temple Street Congregational Church, the first officially recognized Black congregational church in the country. From early on, the church had a school with Vashti Duplex Creed, wife of John Creed and sister of Duplex, as its first teacher. In 1829, 80 children attended the church's Sabbath school, while 60 learned reading, writing, and arithmetic in the day school, which was funded in part by the city. An evening school offered women perhaps their first chance at formal education, and 30 women, many domestic laborers, attended. This community, the Black community of New Haven, knew the paramount importance of education. Expanding access to education was widely seen as essential to Black people's social and economic mobility, and it was integral to the abolitionist agenda as well. On May 28, 1831, Jocelyn wrote to Garrison about an idea to establish a college for young Black men. Jocelyn told Garrison that he had met with the Reverend Peter Williams, a Black leader in New York, about a mutual interest in education. Williams and Jocelyn decided to merge their interests in a new college, which would prepare the young men for active life and aid their brethren in other places in all those things which make men happy and which give them as individuals and as communities influence in the world. Jocelyn asked Garrison to accompany him and Arthur Tappan, the noted white New York philanthropist and abolitionist who had a second home in New Haven, to present the whole plan at the Convention of the People of Color, who meet the week after next in Philadelphia. A newspaper notice later in 1831 reported, quote, the extensive establishment at New Haven, formerly known as the Steamboat Hotel and laterally as Dwight's Gymnasium for Boys, has been purchased by Mr. Jocelyn and is to be converted into a college for Blacks. The site for the college would have been on Water Street between East and Wallace, lands that now sits below the busy juncture of two major highways, Interstates 91 and 95. The convention met June 6 to 11th, 1831, with delegates hailing from around the Pennsylvania, New York, Maryland, Delaware, and Virginia, and including James W.C. Pennington of Long Island, who would later study at Yale and serve the Temple Street Church. Jocelyn, Garrison, and Tappan were invited to speak on June 8th, and the delegates endorsed the proposed college and identified agents to lead the fundraising, with the Reverend Samuel Cornish, a Black man, as general agent and Tappan as treasurer. They chose New Haven and had faith in the city and its people. That faith was not responded to well in New Haven. Garrison visited New Haven not long after the convention in late June and gave 2 public addresses. He would speak and write about the college proposal in the following weeks and months, including in pieces circulated through the Liberator. On September 5th, there was a notice in Philadelphia about the plans. At the same time, Simeon Jocelyn gave an address in New Haven. And around the same time, the first New Haven mention appeared of the insurrection in Virginia known as Nat Turner's Rebellion. On September 8th, New Haven Mayor Dennis Kimberly, an 1812 graduate of Yale, gave notice of an extraordinary meeting of the free men, that is, the white property owners, that would be held 2 days later on September 10th. That September 10th meeting was held in the State House, the co-capitol building that had opened earlier in the year. A contemporary account describes that intense afternoon. So great was the interest to hear the discussion that, notwithstanding the excessive heat and the almost irrespirable atmosphere of the room, the hall was crowded throughout the afternoon. At question was whether New Haven would make history as the home to the first college dedicated to the education and advancement of the Black race, or whether it was gain notoriety as a city where those dreams died. The white male property owners of New Haven spoke with a near unanimous voice. 700 stood opposed to the college, and only 4 in favor. The college in New Haven never happened. This has never been, and I've stopped the reading, has never been a secret story, but it is a story that may have been in recent decades ignored. A story that we're seeking to bring back into circulation to think again about what could have been and what should be. It is a story of absence. So one of the challenges addressed so well by Tobias in his film, by David John Walker in the graphic design, is how to render in the present something from the past that never happened. Finding artistic responses has been part of this story from the beginning. I will close and turn it over to Tobias and then to David with a poem that William Lloyd Garrison wrote in The Liberator in October 1831, thinking of that year of a great eclipse, where he, reflecting on what the white property owners of New Haven had done, wrote the following opening lines of a sonnet. New Haven, thou hast rashly done a deed which shrouds thy glory in black eclipse. To further illuminate this story, let me turn it over to Tobias, who will be followed by David John Walker, and then we'll engage in conversations and questions based on your comments and questions. Thanks again for coming. Tobias, over to you.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's a pleasure to be with you all on this eclipse day. And in fact, it is quite eerie and interesting that we are here talking about an event that happened on an eclipse day. After looking at the views from the YouTube video, counting the numbers from the many screenings we've done around New Haven, within schools, our own public screenings at the Beinecke, I am happy to report that at least 20,000 people are aware of this story and have seen the story in its entirety. Now, that is the minimum, just giving approximate numbers, things that we could calculate based on what we've seen online, as well as the people that have graciously joined us for our many events around Yale and Slavery and public screenings. Now, when we think about the year 1831, perhaps few things come to mind for folks. Most likely because it's 192 years ago. And what the film and the exhibition attempt to do is give people the most immersive look into the past. It's very hard to understand that 1831 is not that long ago, simply because it is not in the news. There is not proper representation during the 19th century for majority of folks. But these creations, the film and the exhibition, create familiarity. And it makes it easier to visualize the direct and indirect causes and effects, how it affected the past culture and how it's affecting our contemporary culture. Once we have that perfect visualization of these events, well, 192 years doesn't seem that long ago. The project itself was quite complex to make, considering we were in the middle of COVID. We don't have faces for a majority of these people, and we're working off of maps primarily. But though the project itself was quite complex to create, the story itself was super clear and very, very clear to tell. And that is because of those brave leaders that compiled all of those events into the pamphlet that you might have seen in the documentary. looking at the polls, I'm happy to see that that percentage of people who have seen it versus who have not seen it is gradually going up. But I do want to talk about the process of making such a thing and how it really affects us moving forward. Anyone who sees this, not just New Haveners. But if we can start with New Haveners, this is indeed a New Haven story. And when we look at everything that's shown in the documentary, we realize that many things geographically, how things were built, how the schematics of our city they're very similar to now. And that really makes the story itself hit home for a lot of folks. And the many, many screenings we've had with the public, we have various responses, obviously. The first response is tears, because this is a very disheartening story. People compare to this past and how sometimes it might seem very similar to our present, or perhaps they visualize what their lives would have been like if their ancestors were able to attend such a college, right? They look into their genealogy and it hurts. Another response is confusion. People have no idea how to cope with this, how to really understand that this was a thing, how to really understand how biased an entire city was in what seemed to be a very progressive state to most folks. And the third one is a bit of anger, but it's not anger as in, you know, this is terrible and I hate New Haven and I hate the history of New Haven and everyone who's a part of this. It's more like I'm angry that the progression of a race of my people was cut off. And those are the emotions that I wanted from people. When making this film, the real struggle is bringing it all to life when there isn't much representation in terms of portraits. A lot of the buildings were hard to get great images of, right? Photography, videography, those aren't very prominent things during this time. But what I did attempt to do was show representation through color, through maps, and add a few voices to it to make it that much more real. And anyone who hasn't seen the film, I urge you to go to our YouTube channel, and perhaps we'll put it in the chat as well, the link. There is clear division in terms of color. You'll notice I'll put certain things in black text, certain things in white text. You'll notice even the people who don't have faces, they have black silhouettes and the others have white figureheads. And even you'll actually see the relationship and how they differ based on who is involved, right? Certain people who fought for this, they have sort of black and white in them. There's little things like that. But most importantly, when we look at the map itself, we're looking at a 19th century map. We can see that New Haven, though is grown exponentially and the culture itself has changed so much, it still has that base of the 9 squares, and we can sort of base a lot of our current living and demographics. We can sort of compare and contrast, but there's a lot of similarities. So the project involved a lot of back and forth comparisons, looking at, well, how similar does this New Haven map look to our 2023, or in that case, it was 2021, when I was making the film? How do those compare? How can we really tell the difference, not only in the way our town was set up, but how the culture was divided and set up? People look at this story and are always given that aha moment when they realize, oh my gosh, I drive over I-91 and I-95 every day to go to work. That was one of the key contributions to this. Putting a GoPro on the car and just getting that perfect view. So we can actually, there's a lot of symbolism in that, and this seamless transition I try to make in which we're time traveling and going back and forth between the 21st century and the 19th century. All of these things you might not notice the first time, but hopefully, subconsciously you're seeing the division as if you were in the 19th century. A story like this, which had a very unfortunate end and led to so many tragic laws that were passed and cultures that were scared away, and more of the same. As Yale continues to progress, we see the loss of so much hope, but at the same time, it was a stepping stone that led to so many great things, right? It's a very complex story in which it's sad, triumphant, and more and more and more. The complexity of that is captured through the minor details that I mentioned before. And this in the exhibition, what they have in common is it's also giving you something tangible, something that you can literally hold on to and understand that this is a story that existed and perhaps has ongoing repercussions or things we're still trying to recover from. And David John Walker, who I'm going to pass the mic to next, does an amazing job of capturing that tangibility. Things that are brought back to the forefront in the 21st century. And he does an amazing job with that. And I will turn it over to David. The floor is yours.
All right, let's see. Michael, you'll have to start my video. All right. Hello, everyone. David John Walker here again. So I will talk, I guess, a bit primarily about the mark and the logo of the college itself. So as we sat down to talk about what it would look like to visualize an identity for a school that never was, we really wanted to dig into the legacy and heritage of the people that were here and think about where they were from geographically, and what they were doing and where this school may have been sited. So I'll start with, let's see, where is this? Let me get see if this will go full screen. View. All right. So 1831 College, originally it was named the College for Colored Youth, and we thought that would not be an apt title for the school, thinking about the current movements and how we've navigated the naming of peoples in our society now. And since there was not necessarily a benefactor or someone who gave money to this institution, there were a number of individuals that definitely could have been the namesake of this institution, like William Lloyd Garrison or Simeon Jocelyn, who had bought land and secured a building that possibly would have been the site of this school. So going through here, thinking about the brand identity and symbolism of the seal for this school, it was important to think holistically about it. So first, why is this showing? Let's see, single page. So first, we wanted to think about it being an academic institution, and one mark that we are known, or at least within North America and within the European context of branding schools or an academic shield to start for a logo. And we also, again, thinking geographically about where the persons were from that would have been attendees of this school, thinking about West Africa, Ghana, the Gold Coast, Nigeria, and other African nations. And so you'll see this Adinkra symbol here for knowledge comes from the Akan people. And also thinking about where this school would have been located on Water Street in New Haven. And it was, of course, a harbor town, used to be known for its lighthouse, and also thinking about water being a life force in the transatlantic slave trade. And last but not least, an academic banner. So combining those things, also thinking about a word mark for the college, for colored youth, or the 1831 college, but also thinking about colors that could have been representative for this school. So initially thinking about black and white. Again, this is a school that did not exist. So black and white would, again, keeps it tied to the history or the imagination. I don't know if a lot of you all know, but Yale's first color was green. In the late 1800s, around the 1890s, they began to officially adopt the dark blue or dark navy blue as the official color of Yale. And so we were also thinking about these colors as being a possibility. So here you see the combinations of the icons, the shield, the Adinkra symbol for knowledge, and then the shield and water, and then the combination of the three within the possible colors that would have been Yale colors at the time, or could have been Yale colors at the time, as well as activating the academic banner. And then we decided to integrate knowledge is power, which was the motto from the Convention of Free Colored People in Philadelphia in 1831, where this idea was first proffered to the public. Here is a combination of all of those marks. So you can see the shield with the Adinkra symbol and the water, the representation of the water with the symbol, with the banner itself and the 1831. And then, of course, you can see iterations of those. Additionally, I thought about patterns and using symbolic patterns in the form of what would be known as kente cloth. So a way to communicate the symbol for knowledge or the symbol for water and how that might be integrated. We were thinking about how that could be integrated within the context of the exhibition, but there were not many opportunities to use patterns in this way. And then dissecting the seal elements themselves, putting a seal together to think about the encompassing of the power of the thought and the imagination of what this college could have been. Again, the shield itself with the two elements, knowledge is power, in 1831 being within the circle. And then featuring acorns and elm leaves or oak leaves, with the saying, you know, from small things becomes great, things become great. And then finally settling on the full seal, featuring the shield and the elements themselves. So it's been a great pleasure to put this together and think about what it would have been to represent a school of this magnitude that would have been the first HBCU in the country. So I'll turn it back over to Michael and Tobias.
Thank you. And Tobias, maybe you can come back on screen, and the three of us conversation may have questions for each other. And we invite again folks in the audience to put questions in the Q&A. And a reminder, there's a prompt in the chat if you want to respond in the chat with one or more thoughts on what could have been, what should be done tangibly. And also, we three and our colleagues would be very keen on what further ways can be pursued to share knowledge of the story. And I wanted to start with we three, a question that I've heard and want to pose to the two of you. What do you what kind of reaction are you getting? Tobias, you talked a little bit about this, but maybe unpack it some more. And David John Walker, you and I were in the gallery space talking with a descendant of Black New Haven who had some thoughts. So we've heard the sort of embodied knowledge. But I wonder, starting with you, David, if you might talk some about, now that it is out in the world in a library and chairs in the exhibition, what you're hearing and sensing from various people.
I mean, what I've gleaned so far, directly and indirectly, is that it would be great to, if there was an actual physical space that housed the memory of the possibility of the people that would have been there. In addition to constant questions about, is there merch, like, in order to support such an effort, right? Like, I would love to proudly wear wear a shirt like you're wearing today, or additional things, beyond the buttons and stickers.
Bias, further thoughts?
Yeah, yes, of course, everyone always talks about the merge. In fact, at the Boucher conference, there was like 3 people that came up after talking about it. But an interesting topic that comes up now quite frequently is actually educational reparations. And, the initial thing that is brought up is, right, let's get a building built, or the ongoing conversation as we talk about sort of Reconstruction and all that, talking about general monetary, compensation, some sort of monetary reparations. But a great conversation always comes up in these groups about how can we get more education for people of this culture that live in terrible neighborhoods that don't even get the opportunity to get the education that is needed. It's not provided. And in fact, there's all of these thoughts, these what ifs about perhaps this college would have led to so much more in terms of educational development within Connecticut and in the United States, and educational development for the minority population. What would that mean for their neighborhoods, right? And how are those neighborhoods immediately affected by that change and educational gifts and opportunity? So, one of the things that conversation leads to is, well, scholarships are obviously important to make sure students can get to 4-year colleges and not feel the burden of not being able to afford it. But another interesting one is, well, an acknowledgement, some sort of physical acknowledgement, right? Like a highway sign of some sort, gets the thought in people's heads that this is not impossible and that more can be done just from seeing that this was a thing, this could have happened, and perhaps giving motivation that, well, this can still happen, and we are sort of in control of how our neighborhoods and how our culture prevails even after such an act. So there's a lot of great and rich conversations. I've had screenings at plenty of schools with teachers, with students. Students love it. Students, obviously, they're reserved about the decision and all of that, but students love to see that this was the first place that it occurred, and they are a direct result of this, and they can now change the trajectory of education moving forward. There's so many thoughts there, and I can go on for days, but those are some of the general ones.
Let me reflect on one of the things that maybe it's confirmation, but that I've been learning is that it is the power of moving image and of a three-dimensional exhibition. And I have often, and will again take the opportunity now to particularly salute Susan Gibbons, who's been stalwart champion of all of this work, and support her in all kinds of ways, tangible ways and otherwise, who had, I think, the good foresight that the research be manifest in multiple formats, in a book, certainly, in a book that is a PDF available for free, but also online through an audio walking tour, and particularly through the exhibition. You may see in the chat, I put the results of the poll, and this is not a super scientific poll, but I bet it's probably somewhat reflective of audiences. 41% have seen the documentary, 24% have been to the exhibition, 18% have read the book. We hope all of those numbers will go up. And those people may have done more than two, may have done all three of those. But it's important to express it in multiple formats, because we all learn in multiple ways, and different audiences begin in different kinds of places. And I think a documentary film is such a powerful way. And this is really having the tangible exhibition, and Tobias, your documentary, and having the knowledge of where the site would have been. And we need to give our great comrade Alvin Ashite credit for being the person who noticed this in the newspaper ads from the past, newspaper notice from the past at the corner of Water and East Street. That begins to make it real. And I have hopes that this time, this story is going to persist. And as I've said, this is not a secret story. There's a talk coming up at a suburban bookstore this week with the title Beneath the Ivy, Yale's Secret History of Slavery and Freedom, which is a salacious title. Maybe that's the way. But, 2001, 3 graduate students published a paper. This is not secret. In 2014, there was a great book with Hilary Moss, who's one of the great scholars of this, that came out. There was a town meeting on September 7th, 2001 in Center Church where this was talked about. So it's not as if this was secret, but there hasn't been the persistence of memory in contemporary times. In the 19th century, it persisted for quite a long time. But I'm really hopeful, and I think it's, what I'm sensing from people is that the tangible, and the film is tangible in a way that text alone is not, and the exhibition being able to sit in a chair with the seal, looking at pictures, really begins to do stuff. I do know if we put a question in the poll saying, do you want a sweatshirt? 100% of the people would respond yes. Now, you can get buttons and stickers for free at the New Haven Museum. And I put in the chat, we will have a public screening of the extraordinary document, Gina's Journey, about the life of William Grimes and the 1831 College on Wednesday, May 8th, 6 p.m. at the Beinecke. And we might have some threads at that, not promising, but come on out. The movie will be free, so it'd be worth coming anyway. But you'll be able to get buttons and stickers and more to come. I'd also note and invite either of you looking at the chat of things that you want to uplift. There's much, and we're grateful, and we're not going to get to everything everybody said, but we want everybody to toss your ideas in, because we will use them and take them seriously and reflect after this hour together. Some of you have questions like, who were the 4 who voted for the college? If you watch the documentary or read the book or go to the show, you'll see that. So I'm going to use that as an encouragement to go back or to see those for the first time. So a number of the factual questions people have, but I wanted to pull up one, and then again invite Tobias and David for you to pull up one or more questions, comments to reflect to. Question was asked, which is a great question. If the Nat Turner Rebellion did not occur, would the New Haven residents have found other reasons to vote against the college for Black men? Now, this is all by definition speculative, but I am convinced, reading closely and rereading all the accounts of the time, that the answer is definitely yes. That Nat Turner's rebellion was not the reason they, suddenly all was good and then one thing happened and he ruined it for everybody, which is a bit how sometimes it has gotten portrayed. I think the answer is yes. The white supremacy was deep and ubiquitous. It was not deeply coded. This is a time when there are so-called race riots, white riots in Cincinnati against Black people in Providence. So not just in a Southern context. So I'm convinced that yes, Nat Turner was not the precipitating reason for the death of this college, and that there would have been other reasons found. But that's my informed speculation based on the record. But Tobias, David, questions that you see or comments that people have posted that you might want to uplift or respond to?
There was a note about, I believe it was in the chat actually, or just a note about, you know, the feeling and perhaps why folks exactly voted against it, which basically tacks on to this question. But, you know, the more I think about it, I sort of go back and forth with people about this. Now, of course, you know, Connecticut, last northern state to abolish slavery. You had certain families who were very serious human traffickers. And, you know, certainly Connecticut was far from progressive. But also it wasn't like antebellum South fully. And I think about the four that voted for the college. And you think about the peer pressure. When we think about how the direction that Yale and New Haven and frankly North America was headed, I look at that moment, that very intense moment that didn't take long, packed into a small room and hundreds of white men just voting. Everyone knew what the outcome would be if they voted for this college. They have a name to uphold, family to protect, religion to stand by. And also, as we know, the result, people who voted for the college were on the bad end of this, right? They were attacked in some way. They got what was expected. So when you look at it, all of these things, of course, majority of them were probably not progressive and majority of them did not want this college to happen. But I think about the fact that there were definitely more than 4 people that were probably willing to hear that idea out more. But when you look at the peer pressure of it all, what Yale is already influencing, the mayor himself is influencing, all of the Southern newspapers that are in circulation talking about how bad this would be. You got to think about it in, you know, the social aspect that clearly people don't want to be the one to be attacked for something like this. And I'm not saying that majority of them would have voted for it if peer pressure wasn't a thing. Majority of them still would have voted no. But certainly that 4 is very jarring. And that certainly has to do with what the moment was and the types of people that were in that voting scene.
Yeah, it just strikes me as you know, as we've done the research and talked about this, the proximity of the 700 people, like knowing that all of the folks that voted were not residents of New Haven, but were counted, right? Like prior to that was the meeting of the alumni, and they joined the meeting to vote against this thing. So in a way, there may have been New Haven residents that were actually okay with this, to your point, Tobias, that would have gone forward, but were overwhelmed by the peer pressure of the alumni, the clergy at the time that had their own thoughts and public writings about their thoughts of educating, you know, colored people at the time.
We have a audience member who's doing work and will be publishing on the Prudence Crandall School, the Canterbury Female Academy. And if you've read the chapter, watched the documentary, you'll know that these two are very much in conversation with each other, and that residents of Canterbury and Eastern Connecticut cited New Haven's example as one of the many things they used against the Canterbury Female Academy and the jurisprudence coming out of it in the so-called Black Law of Connecticut. So I'm excited to see that work and want very much to have that author part of our conversation in a future session like this, and look forward to putting that work in conversation with ours. So appreciate that very much. Somebody asked, did the Institute Library take a stand on this? And that's an interesting question, and I would sort of throw it back, in the sense that we do hope that this is generative. The work that we've done to date is not the end. The book is called Yale and History, A Slavery, intentionally not the history. And Tobias, I'm sure, would be open to further chapters in the documentary of various sorts. And we're keen for those kinds of questions to be asked. What did my part of New Haven have to do with this? What did various people? And we continue to work with Gina Mason, the great-great-granddaughter of William Grimes, who will be screening her documentary with the 1831, thinking about the networks that were around. He was here at the time. So to the questioner who asked about the Institute Libraries, I'd sort of encourage you, and you may have this on your agenda already, see what you can find out. There's more to be known in this, and we're excited to build out the constellation of knowledge and to share what we know, but also plug in what others do know and have to share.
I'm a bit curious to hear from you guys about this is a very general question. What could have been done? And perhaps they're speaking on what could have been done to sway this vote in the other direction, or perhaps what could have been done in terms of like timing, location. I think of it as, well, number one, don't have it in Connecticut. They were very optimistic about the state of Connecticut and the people, and how seamless something like this would be. There were signs that clearly pointed to Connecticut is not ready for something like this. But I'm curious to hear from you guys, because I personally think it might have been a little too early, right? Even the Institute for Colored Youth officially came a decade plus later, and perhaps that was in the timing. But then again, because this was the first, this opened the door for something like the Institute for Colored Youth to happen. I'm just very curious to hear your general thoughts on that.
Mr. Walker?
What could have been done? I mean, it was interesting that, Michael, that you brought up that there was more about it, talked about it during the 19th century, right? And to think about how as time goes on, if the persistence isn't there, that things just weeds grow up and it becomes obscured. And in the same way, I think what could have been done is, yes, Boucher was one of the professors at the Institute of Colored Youth then, and he came back to New Haven. Could it have been reproposed, right? Like, could there have been one cited in New Haven still? And I think about that as a possibility, right? That things were of such a nature then, that it was so obscured that there was not an opportunity for it to be re-brought up. Like, oh, the first one happened, so we shouldn't worry about it in New Haven. But that definitely could have been a possibility.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, Tobias, and thank you, David, for those thoughts. As we gather here virtually at the New Haven Museum, there's a class from the Yale School of Management that is looking at intergenerational wealth gaps between white America and Black America. It's the class with a book forthcoming that's going to be really great, called 15 Cents on a Dollar by Louise Story and Ebony Reed. The two of them are teaching a class right now at SOM. And they're students, and they are looking at the exhibition and are very keen on this. And I'm very keen that hopefully there'll be some generative work out of some of those students and now or in the future, because I think it's possible to calculate, model the costs of something that didn't happen. And if we were to take, for example, an existing HBCU like Howard, which was founded in 1867, so 36 years later, it now has net assets of $2 billion. So you can sort of look at comparables and think about what if a college had been founded in New Haven in 1831, what would the present value be? And as we think about the opportunity lost, we can think about the opportunity cost. You can likewise think about the impact on individuals and families. If somebody had gone to college, if somebody's ancestor had been in college in 1831 and those people exist, what did that mean? And so what would that have meant? And one of the things I'm keen to think about more is, and as I was rereading the chapter, the Black population of New Haven in 1830 was about 7.5%. It would decline over the rest of the century and only come back up in the latter end of the Great Migration into the more contemporary times. And so people left. People like William Grimes went to California. Other people went to California. And to think about what we lost as a community of people who were here, and that I'm sure it wasn't just this college vote, but a variety of things. And questioner asked, when did Garrison say that Connecticut was the Georgia of New England? He wrote that, I believe, in a letter in 1835 in the wake of the so-called Black Law that prohibited education, formally prohibited education in the wake of this story. So it's clear that the white supremacy in New Haven of the dominant culture, I think, looking at the census numbers, led to a diminution of the Black community and therefore to a great loss in value for this community, for the Black community, but frankly, that also means for the community overall. So I think there's some things we need to do to reckon with the tangible, personal and collective costs, and that there are smart people who know how to do that. So I'm keen that the work that we're doing might generate some people to do some modeling and calculations.
There's very quickly, a lot of great notes here from people. One asked, I wonder what would have happened if this had been proposed in a Quaker town. Well, certainly the Institute was sort of a Quaker-controlled African Institute initially. Perhaps that was part of it. But there was another question about the trouble of finding images and sort of discussing or talking about how it struck them while watching the documentary, considering there was a Black activist in Hartford who ran a successful photography studio. Well, when we think about that time, majority of folks did not have portraits, and we look at daguerreotypes and things like that. We're looking at mid-19th century where we start seeing more of that, including photographs of slaves and things like that. But speaking of William Grimes, right? William Grimes, one of the known as the first fugitive slave to write, publish, distribute his own narrative on slavery. That 1855 version has this really strong portrait of him that sort of gives face to the story. That was also a challenging thing, because when you recall a story or a time period or something a person did, you can immediately picture their face, and then that makes it a bit more real for folks. This was very hard to do, and perhaps that might also be a reason why it's a bit difficult for folks to truly understand the magnitude and what certain people did, because not a lot of them have photographs. But hopefully, though very hard to find images of these folks, I don't think their importance was undermined at all, hopefully in the film, in which their figureheads are sort of placeholders, and putting them next to folks who did have photographs, really stressing the importance of how influential and important they were to this work as well. So just a few things to think about.
We are at time, so I will invite each of you to give a word or a sentence of closing benediction. Before doing that, just a program note. Next Mondays at Beinecke is sort of special in that we will have a live student poetry reading on the mezzanine, which we will also be streaming via Zoom webinar registration. If you're on our email list, which I think everybody here is, or you will be if you signed up for this for the first time, you'll get that link if you happen to not be in New Haven. And then we'll be back on April 22nd with a more regular Mondays at Beinecke with Cassidy Jones, great graduate student curator of the part of the current show on Ollie Harrington. And again, May 8th, 6 p.m. live in person, Gina's Journey and what could have been screened. It really makes a difference to see these things on a large screen and in community and have conversation. But with that, before we close out, Tobias, David, any final word or sentence? I think you're muted, David.
Yeah, I was going to say definitely go by the museum. You know, bathe in the eyes of the people on the wall in the 1831 room, dig into their histories, learn their stories, share their stories, pick up a button or a sticker, and keep the knowledge of this institution or the possibility of this institution alive.
See?
Let these stories truly make our country the United States of acknowledgement. And there are many more stories to tell. So this is really just the beginning.
So I will close with knowledge is power, and the Adinkra are proverbs, and the Adinkra that is at the center of the mark of the 1831 college means in English, when the one who does not know learns, they get to know, meaning it's about self-education. And some of the things were not taught in school, but that doesn't mean it can't be known. And so this is all about knowledge is power, and we have to sometimes seize that power ourselves. And most importantly, when we do, not keep it to ourselves, but share it with others. So we hope everyone in this Zoom will share knowledge with each other, with us, and with your neighbors and friends. Thanks again for taking the time to be with us this afternoon. Thank you, Tobias and David. It is a joy to be with you virtually as it is to work with you on this important work. Have a great afternoon.